If you don't know who I am, my name is Mark Lee. I'm one of the pastors here at VantagePoint, and I just want to start out by asking you a question. Have you ever gotten really excited about something? You got your expectations high, your hopes were high, everything was, you were super excited about something, but then all of a sudden you got to it and you were like, really? Like that was it? Some of you are like, yeah, it's called marriage. Some of you are like, yeah, it's called parenting. And you know, honestly, to a certain extent, there's some amount of truth to that. You know, because when you and I attach our happiness and our sense of arrival to a broken, sinful, selfish person, we're bound to be at least a little bit disappointed, right? I mean, at least my wife was. And so here we are on the other side of Christmas, right? Here we are on the other side of Christmas. And sometimes it's kind of easy to feel the same way. See, here's the thing. In my family, Christmas is a huge deal. We have 5 kids. My wife loves Christmas. I'm a pastor, which means that I'm really, really good at over-promising and under-delivering. And so, you know, I'm always telling the kids, like, this Christmas is going to be awesome. This Christmas is going to be amazing. And, you know, in fact, a couple years ago, one of my boys came to me, and he was like, you know what, Dad, you keep saying that Christmas is going to be awesome. You know what would make Christmas awesome? If you got me my first cell phone. Number one, that's pretty manipulative on his part to say that, but I want to make Christmas awesome. You want a cell phone? This is what I've realized about the species called the teenage boy, that when you get a cell phone, it's not just you getting a cell phone. When you get a cell phone, you have now become a man. You know, this is a rite of passage on your part. Now, granted, it used to be that back in the day, you had to drink the blood of a bear that you had just killed, or that you had to climb a mountain and come back with a feather of an eagle. But apparently, all you need to do these days to become a man is get added onto the cell phone plan of your parents, and it's really no big deal. And so, you know, I was thinking to myself, you know, yeah, I think he's of age. I think he can handle it. Maybe this is a good time for him. So here's the thing. Not only does he want a cell phone, but he wants an Apple product. You know what that means? That means Dad's going to have to find another job. That means a second job, not another job. That means that we're probably going to have to sell off one of our children. So after working at Tacos Del Rio for a little bit longer, you know, we finally go and get it for him, and we're so excited on Christmas morning. We're just so excited for him because he's getting exactly what he wants. But and time out. By the way, don't you hate this as a parent? Like, you get your kid, you're super excited about the gift that you give them. You know, they're opening it. They're like, they look at you. They're like, Daddy, what else did you get me? And you're like, I want to kill you right here on Christmas morning. Okay. But he doesn't do that. He opens up his present. He's like, there's a light coming from the box, and the phone isn't even on. Everything is perfect in the world. You know, the sun and the moon and the stars, they all align. The lion is laying down with the lamb. Everything is perfect. And you know what happens? This is a true story. He gets his phone that's not even turned on. He takes 3 steps, and what happens? Yeah. Hey, look at... Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So it's hard for Mommy and Daddy to not have a heart attack in that moment. It's hard for him not to be just a little bit disappointed with Christmas. And you know, it's easy to feel that way. We all love Christmas, right? I mean, Christmas is so festive. It's so fun. It's so wonderful. It's the most wonderful time of the year. Christmas is the time, I think of Christmas as almost being on a 2-month cruise. Wouldn't it be amazing to be on a 2-month cruise? You know what you're like on a cruise, right? Your wife comes to you and she's like, honey, but that excursion is too expensive. And you're like, but we're on vacation. Honey, do you really think we should have 2 banana splits after dinner? We're on vacation. So sometimes we approach Christmas the same way, right? Honey, don't you think those Christmas gifts are too expensive? It's Christmas. Don't you think we should limit ourselves to 5 pieces of prime rib? It's Christmas. But the problem with Christmas is something called January. I like to call it the Christmas hangover. You know, this is where you wake up and the house is a mess, and you see a tiger wandering around in the house. Your 5-year-old has a tattoo on their face, and you're like, what in the world just happened here? And so we get to January, and oftentimes we see the need for some type of change in our lives. So we're starting this series called Changemaker. Really want to encourage you to be a part of this, because we're going to be talking about the most important changes that we need to make in our life over the course of the next 6 weeks. We're going to be talking about how it is that we want to see change happen in our families, and in our church, in our communities, and in our workplaces. And here's the thing, right now is definitely the season for change. And as we get to January, man, God has given us a gift. And he's given us the gift of a new day. He's given us the gift of a new week. He's given us the gift of a new month. He's given us the gift of a new year. He's given us the gift of a brand new decade. And so here's a question I have for you. What then is going to be different about 2020 for you? What's going to be different about 2020? Because here's what I want to tell you that's wrong. That practice does not make perfect. Practice makes a beginner better, but practice does not make somebody perfect. Do you know how I know that? It's because there's somebody that you have at your office that's worked there a long, long, long time. They're kind of stodgy. They're kind of crumpy. Never heard that word, crumpy. But they're kind of stodgy. The best thing that you can say about them is that they're barely good enough not to get fired. Has practice made that person perfect? No, because practice does not make us perfect. And so in the art of living, have we really gotten better at the art of living? Have you become that person in life? That's what we want to talk about. What are the necessary changes that need to happen in our life? And so what I want to do is I want to talk about the entire book of Ecclesiastes today, if that's okay with you. And for some reason, I can't say that word without Turn to your neighbor and say it just like that. Ecclesiastes. We're going to look at the entire book of Ecclesiastes because it talks about this very element. I think it's fascinating. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 10 through 11, it says this right here. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I'm trying to talk like Antonio Banderas. I refused my heart no pleasure. I think I just sound like Nacho Libre instead. My heart took a delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for my toil. You know what he's saying? He's saying this. You know what my philosophy is in life? I work hard and I play even harder. Like, how many of you are like that? Like, I'm kind of like that. I work hard and play even harder. And yet what we're going to find is that he's going to give us a commentary on his own philosophy of life. As he goes on to say this right here, yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and when I looked at all that I toiled to achieve, everything was, did y'all say that word with me? Everything was meaningless. Chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Let's look at that one more time. Yet when I surveyed, when I looked at everything that I'd eaten, when I'd looked at everything that I had done, when I looked at everything that I had toiled to achieve and everything that I worked for, everything was meaningless. Interesting. Let's talk about that for a second. The word meaningless in the Hebrew is this word right here. It's the word hevel. Would you say that word with me? It's the word hevel. Hevel. You see this all the time in the book of Ecclesiastes. Hevel, hevel. Everything is hevel. What you find is that this word shows up 38 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, making it not only an important theme throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, it makes it an extremely important theme throughout the entire Bible. Hevel, hevel. Everything is hevel. And although the Bible translates this as meaningless, what you will find is that a literal translation of this word, anyway, is that it is literally translated as a mist. It's a vapor. It's a cloud. And although you and I usually typically look at that word and that phrase, and we typically think about the fleeting nature of a mist, and how a mist is really, in terms of eternity, kind of here today and gone tomorrow, what you will find is that that is actually not what the word hevel is really all about. The word hevel is more about the fact that there's something very intangible about that mist. There's something very incontrollable about that mist, that as much as I want to put my hands around it and control it and get something about it, that there's something very ephemeral, that there is this ephemeral quality of that mist that I cannot just seem to get my arms around. How do you solve a problem like Maria? Oh, well, the boys, a cloud. What? But my wife always makes fun of me that I only know the first line of every Christmas carol, you know? Anyway, what are they saying? They're not saying that Maria is going to be here today and dead tomorrow. What they're saying is that there's something she's just always, I can't control her. That as much as I want to conform her and as much as I want her to just be what I ask her to be, that she just won't do that. And there is this very hevel that as a change maker in life, there is this intangible, there's this ephemeral quality of life that to a certain extent what we want to do is we want to be able to control our finances, and yet there's this intangible, incontrollable quality of our finances even. Even if you're affluent, you would say the same thing. Do you know how I know that? Because no matter how much money that you have, you still worry about finances. Why? Because I want to control you. But somehow you won't let me, that I do everything right, that I give, that I save, that I live within my means, but then this stupid water heater breaks down. My roof starts leaking. There's an intangible, uncontrollable quality about my health, that I can run, that I can do everything right, I can still end up getting a cold. That I can manage my diet, that I can do everything, and that I can do everything to make my body feel right. And yet, for some reason, my body does not feel right. I just saw an article this week that said that there's a woman who lived to be over 100 years old, and she said that the secret to long life was the drinking of Diet Coke. There's an actor in the 80s named George Burns. You remember George Burns? Like, he lived to be, I don't know, like 1,000 years old, and he said the secret to long life is the smoking of cigars. So next time you see me drinking Diet Coke and smoking cigars, now you understand why. But there's this, it's like, if that's the case, I don't know what the heck is going on. By the way, can I take a time out for a second? Like, there's somebody who's been on our staff. His name is David Coronado, and he's the one who's done almost all of our counseling. He's done almost all of our hospital visits. He is now in need of a little bit of care and prayer because it's not even for certain, so I don't know why I'm saying this, but like it looks like he most likely has a very rare and aggressive form of cancer. And so let's just pray for him. The shepherd needs to be shepherded right now. So let's be there for him. Okay, let's go back. There's just this hevel. Everything is hevel. Incontrollable. I want to control it, but for some reason you won't let me. Let's go back to verse 10 because verse 10 says this: I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. Boy, isn't that appropriate after Christmas, right? Denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. I had seconds. I had thirds. I had fourths. I don't even know how much peppermint bark I ate. I don't know how much money I spent in December. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all my labor. Okay, let's stop. Yet, listen to this. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and all that I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. Chasing after the wind, nothing was gained under the sun. He says this, as I find myself on the other side of Christmas, I expect myself to be feeling different than I'm feeling right now. I expect myself to be feeling energized. I expect myself to be feeling like I could just tackle the world. And yet sometimes I come to the other side and I just feel a little bit tired, a little bit unfulfilled, a little bit frustrated. And I think this is so awesome coming from King Solomon, because King Solomon has everything, right? He's a king, for goodness sake. He is arguably the richest man in the entire world who has ever lived. In 2 Samuel, it talks about how silver was as common as stone. Okay, so for you to go to Solomon's house would have been like this. Hey, you have a really nice rock garden. Oh, that's silver. You know, you wouldn't understand. So he is arguably the richest man who has ever lived. The Bible calls him the wisest man who has ever lived. And what does he have to say? He says this right here. He says, I gave myself everything that I wanted. I had a garage that was bigger than Jay Leno's. I had a beach house that was nicer than Tony Stark's. You know, first class airfare, courtside seats. That was my life. You know, I see the movie Crazy Rich Asians. I'm like, I wish I was the crazy rich Asian. Honestly, I'm like, I want to fly first class. I want to live in a place like that. I want to drive a car like that. And what Solomon is saying is this: I do all those things, and I still feel the same way that you do. You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking I'd at least like to have a chance to feel that way. He says it's meaningless. Still feel the same way. You and I have a want in our life. And we are unhappy because we do not have what we want. But here's the reality. Every time God gives us that want, we don't get happy. We just move on to the next one. And what we find out is that happiness seems to be a bit of a moving target, doesn't it? It's always moving. It's always changing. And here's what we find out, that this isn't something that's just happened a couple thousand years ago. This is something that we feel right now. Part of the reason why we love the holidays is that part of the reason is because we get to suspend reality, if only for a little bit. We get to indulge and we get to indulge and we get to indulge. But the problem is that January always shows up. What he's saying is this, that you can go to Vegas, go ahead. You can escape, you can escape, you can escape. The problem is Monday is always going to come. You can work, you can work, you can work. Sometimes what will end up happening is that by the time you get enough money, you'll be too old to spend it. Hevel. Hevel. Everything is Hevel. And so what's going to happen now is that a little bit later in the book, Solomon's going to give us an answer. And it's an answer that we're going to agree with. But then it's going to be an answer that he himself undercuts. And he says this in Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 17 through 18. He gives us an answer that we think is the obvious answer at that point. And then he's going to refute his own answer. And he's going to say this: the quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools. That wisdom is better than the weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. We read this, and it's obvious that the answer is that we are to live by wisdom. That the answer is that we are to fear the Lord, because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And even to that, you know what he says? He says this: Hevel, Hevel. Everything is Hevel. Why would the wisest man in the world say that wisdom is Hevel? You know why? He's simply saying that wisdom and the fear of the Lord don't guarantee you a better life. That sometimes good people get cancer. Sometimes people who drink Diet Coke and smoke cigars live forever. He's not saying that wisdom is meaningless. He's saying that wisdom is intangible. He's saying that wisdom is a bit uncontrollable. That, in other words, what he's saying is that sometimes that wisdom doesn't always work the way that you think that it should. Sometimes you guard your purity. You honor God. Guess what? He still leaves you. Sometimes you save and you save and you save and you save. But then your medical bills just flush it all down the toilet. What do they say? They say that there are two things that are inevitable in life. Death and what? Braces. And it's never one round of braces, let me tell you. It's like a second round. It's a third round of braces. Sometimes you work and you work and you work. You still don't get the grades that you want. You still end up working the graveyard shifts. Sometimes you still end up working the jails. So what's a change maker to do? How do we hold the intangible? How do we control the uncontrollable? How do we get our arms around this intangible, ephemeral quality of what this mist and vapor is all about? Well, he's saying that if you want to, sometimes the secret is not to try and control it. Sometimes what we'll find is that he'll say this secret is to simply accept it. And what we're going to find is that he's saying that the secret to life is sometimes, the secret to solving your problems is not sometimes solving your problems. Sometimes the secret to solving your problems is actually embracing your problems. Sometimes God doesn't provide a way around it. Sometimes he doesn't provide a way over it. Sometimes he doesn't provide a way under it. Sometimes the only way that you can go through it is to actually go through it. And he says that in these verses right here, Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 7 through 8. He says, go, eat your food with gladness, and drink your wine with a joyful heart. God has already approved of what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife whom you love and all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun. All your meaningless days. Now, he just sounds like a grumpy old man, right? It sounds like he's saying you might as well eat and drink. You know why? Because tomorrow we're all going to die. That's what it sounds like he's saying. But in fact, what we're going to find is that that's not what he's saying at all. What he's saying is actually this right here. That if everything is meaningless under the sun, then changemakers look up. That if everything is meaningless under the sun, well, then here's what you need to do. You need to look up. You need to look up. Let me tell you what you need to do in 2020. You need to look up. If you want to change in your life, if you want to be the person, the man, the woman that God has called you to be, then you're going to have to look up. Colossians chapter 3, verse 1, I love this verse. It says this, since then you have been raised with Christ. Since you have been baptized with Christ, since you identify with him, since he is in you, and since you are in him, here is what I want you to do. Set your eyes on things above. Augustine says this, that you and I have a restless heart because you and I have first not found our rest in God. That you have been made for something more, and that you have been made for someone more in this life. And that finally, We find that rest when we find God. Now remember that hevel isn't about meaning, but that hevel is about control. Oftentimes we try and control what only God can control. And so here are a couple questions that I just want to ask you about that control. A couple questions. First question is this right here. Does God already know where you're going to college? Okay, now you might not be a student, so if you're not a student, you can go ahead and apply this to your own children. Does God know where you or where your children are going to go to college? Someone say yes. Let me ask you this second question. Does God already know who you're going to marry or who your children are going to marry? Someone say yes. Does God already know how your kids are going to turn out or how your grandkids are going to turn out? Someone say yes. Does God already know what the doctors cannot tell you? Someone say. So what he's saying is this. So if God already knows every hair on your head, he's saying, and if you are not trying to control that mist, but if you allow the only person who can control that mist to control that mist, then here's what you can do in that moment. You can relax. You can enjoy God's most basic blessings of what? What does that verse say? It says, eat your food with gladness, drink your wine with a joyful heart, always be clothed in white, enjoy life with your wife. The most basic blessings of life that God has given you. You can relax and you can enjoy that when you finally come to stop trying to control that mist yourself. When you allow the only person who can really control that to control that. Let me tell you a story. Former North Texas quarterback Damon West was sentenced to 65 years for a long series of meth-related burglaries. True story? After 1999, he worked in politics. Then he ended up working on Wall Street. And as he started working on Wall Street, that's where he got introduced to a wonderful thing called methamphetamines. He says that methamphetamines are probably the most satanic drug that has ever been created because he said that he could not give away everything that he owned in his life fast enough. He lost his job. He lost his family. He lost his possessions. He was homeless. He had lost everything. Finally, police ended up catching him for all of these burglaries because he wanted to steal from everyone around him so that he could get more meth. And he was eventually sentenced to 65 years in a Texas state prison, which is pretty much considered a life sentence. And check this out. After his sentencing, he had 5 minutes with his mother before he got shipped away to prison. And his mother said, you now have 2 debts. You have one heck of a debt that you're going to pay to the state of Texas, and the state of Texas is going to make good on that debt. But guess what? You have another debt that you need to pay as well. And that is the debt that you have to pay to me and your father. That you will get on God's back. No gangs, no tattoos. Do you understand that debt? She said this, that you will either come back as the man that we raised, or you are not going to come back at all. And he ended up receiving Christ, making the biggest change of all in his life. He ended up being the person who was paroled the fastest in Texas prison history. And guys, it is my pleasure to have him tell his own story, Mr. Damon West. No, I'm just kidding. Wouldn't that be awesome if we actually did that? Biggest change of all. Accepted Christ, ended up being paroled faster than anybody else in Texas state history. Talk about being a change maker. You know, here's why we're talking about this kind of change before we go to anything else. You know where real change starts? Real change starts by you saying that I'm sick of the life that I'm living right now. Dr. Phil, how's that working for you? How's what you're doing right now working for you? Because you will never hold on to something else until you let go of what you already have. And you will only let go of what you have right now if you're motivated to change. And you're only motivated to change when you see the uselessness, the futility, the meaninglessness, and the intangible quality of hell that you think to yourself, I can't do this anymore. What did Jesus ask the man at the pool of Bethesda? Do you really want to be well? He's like, heal me, Jesus. What does Jesus say? But do you really want it? You say that you want to be well. You say that you want to be healthy. You say that you want to have a relationship with God, and you say that you want a better marriage. But do you really, really want it? Because we haven't seen that through the years. So here's a quick question I have for you, and it's something that I apply to my own life. That is this: what are the RPMs of your life, and how would you get on God's back in some of the most important areas of your life? What does it look like for you to get on God's back? What does it look like for you to get on God's back? We're going to look at these areas right here, the RPMs of your life: relational, physical, mental, and spiritual. What I always do is I outline those areas in my own life, and I go, what does it look like for me to get on God's back in all of those particular areas? Relational, physical, mental, spiritual. Maybe for some of you, you need to start praying again. Maybe some of you need to stop smoking. Maybe some of you need to start sharing your faith. Maybe some of you need to stop keeping your options open. Maybe some of you need to start surrounding yourself with good people by going to church consistently, by being a part of a small group. Maybe some of you need to stop hanging around with a certain group. Can I tell you this? Even if you're not a believer today, I love the fact that you're here, but even you can take a spiritual step. Because the greatest change that you could ever make in your entire life, and the reason why we gathered today as a group of people, is just because God has changed our lives. The message of Christianity is all about the fact that 2,000 years ago that Jesus came as God, and that he didn't come to collect a debt, he came to pay that debt himself. He gave his life on a tree, rose himself from the dead 3 days later, so that if you and I believed in him, that you and I would then have the power that raised him from the dead to make that change in our lives. And maybe that's what you need to do today as you start off a new year. You need to start out a new relationship. You need to turn over a new leaf. You need to start out with a new power.